Aloha! Welcome to the Live Ukulele Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Bordessa, and in this episode, I'm going to talk about tone, because there is a reason to talk about the tone. But before we do that, catch you folks up on a couple of things. You can probably hear the frog in my voice. Been fighting the COVID for the past week, and still coming back positive, which is kind of a bummer, but feeling mostly my normal self, just kind of have a frog in my throat and I'm all stuffed up. Good stuff. But this past week was the launch of the Groove Ukulele ebook, which if you missed all of the noise and excitement about that, it's an ebook all about how to strum, how to become more confident in the idea of strumming and the motions of keeping your hand stuck to the rhythm as opposed to thinking about individual strumming patterns all the time. It's a system that kind of helps you feel the music more than need to think about the music all the time. So if you're inclined to check that out, go have a look. It's a 70-plus page ebook, and I made video walkthroughs basically of all the concepts that you touch on throughout the ebook. There are accompanying videos, so you can also see what's going on and listen to me play the examples and things like that. So if you're so inclined, there will be a link in the podcast description. Otherwise, just go to liveukulele.com. There's a big banner right on the front page, Groove Ukulele. Last Sunday, the 20th, going back couple of weeks here. I've been sick for a very solid long week, and that was the Mauiola benefit concert, which was wonderful. I got to play with my friend Dagan. I played bass for him, and also a gal named Peyton, who happens to lose her guitarist or something right before the show. He couldn't make his flight or something, so she was down a guitarist. So Dagan and I also backed her up on some songs. She had a cool song called Saddle Road. I'm not sure who she is. It was the first time I had met her. But the songs were straightforward enough to just jump in and play some backup. So that was exciting. And the stage was huge. The stage was massive for Big Island. It was like a whole festival stage with double stack subs on both sides, and definitely the loudest my bass has ever been. It was like I'm not a bass player, right? I'm an ukulele player. That's why I have this podcast. I've been running the website for going on 20 years now, and I'm not so much a bass player. And so recently I've been past, year and a half since COVID has kind of been tapering off. Been playing bass with Dagan just to practice, just for something to do, something different, challenge myself a little bit. Because playing bass is a commitment. You have to know what's happening as the bass player. You have to play with strong timing. You kind of have to lead and be the guy. And especially when you're sitting on top of double stack subs on each side and the whole stage is blah. You feel everything vibrating your brain when you play a note. You better be right on. So it's kind of high pressure. But I've played with Dagan for so long that I can pretty much read exactly what's going on. I know his songs, even though we haven't played these specific ones a whole lot. I was familiar with them enough to just wing it. And then once I heard that we were backing this Peyton gal up, I was like, it's no big deal, no pressure, because that's, so far out of our wheelhouse of just winging it that we'll just do what we can do and it'll be great. And it was a beautiful day. It was absolutely amazing. Everybody coming together to share music and share space in support of our friends and family over on Maui. There was just so many amazing people I hadn't seen in a long time. The Lim Ohana was there. The Bertelman Ohana was there. Two big-time Waimea Town Hawaiian music Hall of Fame families. Just absolutely amazing. Only Pa'a met the guys from that band. They were kind of like old school Kalapana-ish, good vibes with, some nice lead guitar kinds of stuff. They were super nice guys. Bula Kailivai was there. Ho'aikane played the set before my other band. I played with my band Kingside, which is kind of on the rock side of what I do. We play like kind of hip hop, funk, rock sorts of stuff and try and feature as many of my own and our other singer Ryan's originals as we can. But it's really kind of a party band, but we heard about the opportunity and, we've all been itching to do something, anything to try and give back. And it was, last minute, of course, because the fires had just happened and everybody was just trying to pull something together, but threw our name in the ring, and there was, I think, just barely enough space on the lineup for us to be in there. And Julia Brotman ended up coming in to help kind of organize things a little bit, and she kind of knows Ryan, and I think it was, who like, yeah, these guys are going to be legit and they can stay on the lineup kind of a thing. But we went on after Ho'aikane, which, if you don't know, Ho'aikane is an old school Hawaiian band from Kona who have been stomping for the past 20, 30 years. And they came on, they had full horns. They had maybe 9 guys in the band, something like that. It was huge. They took up the whole stage and they just rocked it. It was amazing. We were sitting backstage and it's super loud. It was loud enough that I had my earplugs in backstage. That's what kind of loud it was. But they were just jamming so hard, and we're looking at each other like, oh my gosh, this is like the craziest band that could possibly open up for us. We've, heard these guys on the radio since we were little kids, and here they are just stomping, and we're supposed to go on after them. But it was lovely. We got on, and we all felt like we did, achieved our goal of the level we wanted to play at. And, we had 5 songs that we played, and we had practiced them. So it was a real tight 20 minutes, and we just bang, 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 quick transitions and stuff like that. And it was a really, really wonderful day, wonderful people, wonderful cause, and, just special to be able to be part of just live music again. And even before COVID, there was kind of there has been just a lack of live music here in Hawaii. Like when I was growing up, there would be every month at least, if not every week, there'd be some free something going on somewhere where you could go and just listen to music. And they would bring in, radio class, not necessarily world class, but like Hawaii class popular people, whether it be some Hawaiian band or some slack key artist or some Hawaiian group. It was just, that was how it was like all the time growing up. And I got to see so many amazing bands and so many amazing musicians that way. And that's just kind of petered out over the years, I imagine, because of the rise of the internet. Now everybody can just watch it on YouTube. But you could tell that at this event, obviously everybody was out to support Maui, but they were also out. It was the same crew that would have been like grown up with that and been excited about going to those shows themselves. And it was really neat to see that side of the community come out, real super local style people, and just to see that love for live music, because they recorded it on kahilu.tv. If you want to check any of it out, it was all wonderful. But if you want to check any of it out, you can go to kahilu.tv. I'll put a link in the podcast description. But, we're on there, Ho'aikane's on there, and then the Bertleman Ohana came afterwards. And I just have to say that I taught ukulele with Kaylee Bertleman 7, 8, 9 years ago, maybe at K Arts at Waimea Middle School. And so I knew her from back then, but had never really gotten the chance to, we were just teaching. We weren't playing music, so I'd never heard her sing really. And she came out on stage with her family, and the Bertlemans are all like sailors. Her dad was a sailor on Hokulea, like the original voyage of Hokulea, and Uncle Chad and Auntie Pomai are together now. And it's just like powerhouse family. But they came out on after us, after Kingside, and just to hear her sing, and she played the upright bass. It was just such a treat, because there's only so much you can capture on an album, and an album is expected to be a certain thing, right? It's supposed to be a very clean package, especially these days. And you put it out there and you submit it to the Hokus and blah, 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 blah. Whatever happens to it, happens to it. But it's at these live events where you have like different angles on the music from what you'd normally get. Like the Bertlemans, they all went up there together, And obviously they play together because they sounded absolutely pristine. It was just incredible. It sounded right off a record. But the configuration of the family is one of those things that you'd never have that exact thing happen on an album. And they played all Maui songs, and it was so special. It was just, I want to give a shout out to the Bertelmans, because that was, for me, hands down and by a lot, the highlight of the day was watching them sing. And I just cried my eyes out most of the time. It was really beautiful, really amazing. And so nice to hear Kaylee sing on such a big stage and to sing so wonderfully. It was a nice surprise. And I know she put out an album last year. One of my friends actually worked on it. But it was just magic, just an absolutely magic day. And yeah, burned the candle hard, I guess, because came home and crashed, totally crashed. But anyways, that's enough of an intro. That's a long intro for my podcast. Usually I'm just kind of hanging out. This is not kind of one of those things I gotta put out there, right? First and third Saturdays. But I've hardly talked this past week and a half or whatever, since Sunday, really. So it's nice to talk a little bit, exercise that part of my brain. But I wanted to talk about tone, because even though I'm not on Facebook, not on Instagram, not on TikTok, none of that stuff, I've decided that's not good for my life. That is not good for my brain to be parts of those things. So I don't do any of that social media kinds of stuff. YouTube is really the only thing I do. And I don't really think that's super social media-y. But how I stay in touch, vaguely in touch, is by listening to certain ukulele podcasts when I see something that comes through that is of interest. And the other day I was listening to the Ukulele Underground podcast, and Aldrin was talking about tone. I love Aldrin to death. I think he's a wonderful player. I think he's a wonderful guy. They do wonderful stuff on the website. But his explanation of tone left me feeling a little wanting. Like, I mean, yes, but. And so what I thought I would maybe try and somewhat explain here is the yes, but that I felt that he didn't necessarily cover. And so the premise was that his guys asked him, his like moderator dudes that he works with, Aaron and not Ryan anymore, but the other guy, Colin, my brother, I cannot remember your name. But they had asked him, who do you think has the best tone? Name 3 or 5 or something ukulele players who have the best tone. And tone can be so many different things, but the way that I think about it and the way I kind of internalize tone is you have 2 parts. There's the timbre of a note, and there's the tone of a note. And this is probably where you get into like languagey discussions of like, oh, that's not actually the definition of that, but this is how I think of it in my head. Timbre is like the inherent sound of the instrument. So you have a piano and you plonk a middle C note on a piano, pictured in your head. It has a very specific sound, right? A very pure sound. It rings and it has that it sounds like a piano. And then you have an ukulele and you pluck the middle C string on the ukulele. That's the timbre, right? The difference between those. A piano sounds like a piano and ukulele sounds like an ukulele. If you play that C note on a saxophone, it's going to sound different because a saxophone is a different instrument. They're all going to have a specific timbre to the sound that is created. And so that timbre character kind of comes with the instrument. What I think of as tone, and this is where his discussion got a little bit muddy, was that he was talking about like the different sizes of the ukulele. Like a soprano ukulele has like a snappy, bright tone, and a tenor has like a more smooth and strong tone or whatever. And to me, that's timbre. You have different sizes of instruments, and they each bloom, the way that the notes bloom happens in different ways. To me, that's the timbre of the instrument. That's the inherent sound that it has. All right, so I don't really think of the tone of the instrument the same as the tone of the player. And the tone of the player to me is within the confines of XYZ sound that this instrument makes, whether you're playing a tenor or a baritone or a soprano or a clothesline in the yard, whatever the instrument is that you're playing, I think of tone as how you sound creating notes on that instrument. That is the player's contribution to the sound. The timbre is kind of inherent. That happens from the instrument inherently, right? Anybody who plays a note on that instrument, it's going to be within certain guardrails of variation. And the difference in tone is how each person attacks that string, and on that same instrument, how it sounds different. So to me, good tone is somebody's comfort with producing nice sounding notes on an instrument. Any instrument, but obviously the timbre of the instrument is something you get used to, and you get used to playing to that. And I feel like the longer you've played a certain instrument, the better your tone is probably going to be, because you learn to play to the timbre of that specific instrument. And to me, that's the tone. It's kind of the human value that can adjust things from the timbre's inherent self. The human value can adjust things and change things so that you can pick a note so that it sounds more snappy because you're picking closer to the bridge, or you can make it more warm by picking right by the middle of the string. You can play with a buzz because you're being careless of how you're moving, or you can play really cleanly and crisply by making sure your finger is high up inside of the fret towards the bridge. Those kind of movements to me are what make tone. That's tone. So timbre is the inherent sound of the instrument, whether it be a big ukulele or a small ukulele or a saxophone or a clothesline in the yard. The tone is the human touch that a person brings to whatever instrument. And usually it's a combination of both that create the sound of an artist that we expect to hear. Herb Oates Jr. came up in that discussion, obviously, because Herb has some of the best tone of anybody who plays ukulele or any instrument. Just very profoundly clean and consistent and round. Just everything that he plays sounds really nice. And you could give the timbre of that instrument that he plays to anybody, and they could make it sound way worse than he does because their tone isn't nearly as good, right? That's a tone thing. It's not a timbre thing. But it's whatever the sound of that person is as they play an instrument, that is their tone. And it can be good, it can be bad, it can be all the personal stuff that makes it sound like them. Like, maybe not so much anymore, but used to be. You hear an ukulele player on the radio and you could pretty much tell who it was because there weren't that many ukulele players playing recognizable ukulele on the radio. And you could identify them from their tone. A lot of what would help you identify who it was their tone and the way they touched the strings. Not necessarily what they were playing, though that is a big hint as well if you're trying to figure out who is playing a certain part. But the tone, it's really an interesting thing because, and I mean, I'll give you some backstory. This is how I got to start thinking about tone. Is when I was in my teens, I was a huge Eric Johnson nut. Huge Eric Johnson nut. That's like almost all I listened to from probably 16 to 20. That's like Eric Johnson, which is not a bad thing because he's a wonderful musician and an insane guitar player. If you don't know Eric Johnson, you should look him up. Look up I think it's the 1988 Austin City Limits performance is just out of control. It's just ridiculous. Without a doubt, one of the best guitarists ever. But I think part of the reason I was drawn to Eric is because, and I would listen to the music, and the music was absolutely wonderful and it was beautiful because he had really nice tone. There's a lot of really amazing guitarists who play super well, but when you listen to them, it's kind of like hard on your ears or shrieky or thin or too dark or whatever it might be, because their tone, they haven't spent as much time thinking about their tone, or maybe the tone that they want to hear isn't necessarily something that fits so well with what I want to hear. But with Eric, it was like, that's what's up. That's the sound that I want to hear in my head. That tone just like really matches with my soul at this moment in time. That's what I want to listen to. It was a lot because of his sound, because of the tone of the guitar that he had created. And, working with electric guitar components and pedals and amps and stuff like that there's a lot more room for variation and differences in sound. But I always remember that, once I had really gotten into his stuff and listened to his music and kind of exhausted all of that, I started to kind of dive into some of his philosophy and find interviews and lessons with him and stuff. And there's a lot of wonderful resources out there as well along those lines. But I remember hearing him say that he thinks the guitar sounds awful, that just like a guitar, the timbre of an electric guitar inherently sounds like crap. And he always strove to make his guitar sound like a piano and or a violin, because he felt like those just out of the box were better sounds, better timbres, and that's what spoke to him. And if you listen to any of his playing during, I guess the loud years when he was kind of found the sound and was playing really loud through a big stack of Marshalls, you listen to him and his guitar sounds like kind of like a violin, and they called it the violin tone, because he had gotten to a point where he was capturing that touch that sort of emulated the violin and got rid of all of the stuff that he didn't want to hear and kept what he did want to hear. And the result was just this beautiful, they were kind of the notes he'd play with like bloom. There wasn't like this pack of the pick hitting the strings. Like he had gotten to a point where his touch, he would hit the strings in a way where like you wouldn't even hear the pick hit. It just, the note would start. And that lack of attack is kind of what made everything sound like a violin. And I was super drawn to that. And of course I tried to learn his licks and play like him and, get a tone like Eric Johnson, which you're never going to do on an ukulele, an acoustic ukulele. I tried to do it with pedals and stuff as well. That was informative and useful, but in the long run wasn't the part I think that was as valuable. The part for me was, okay, so here's this guy who decided that he wants to make his guitar sound like a violin and a piano, and he has kind of achieved that. How can I make my ukulele sound like his guitar or a piano or a violin? What is my approach to capture that sound? And so I sat and adjusted my tone and experimented. And I've talked about this before, but just sitting and, examining all the little adjustments, all the little different ways my finger could hit the strings and taking notes of what sounded good, what I liked, what I didn't like. And, just kind of collecting the data for this stuff and paying attention and keeping what worked and throwing out what didn't, until I got to a point where I had this tone that I was creating was out of the box, a lot more nice for me to listen to than whatever I had started with. And it was an evolution of changing the tone that I got out of the instrument. And I think that's the journey that a lot of players take, is that tone is kind of inherent to you. You don't really get to pick and choose what it's going to be, because that's just you. That's how you touch the strings. It's like your singing voice. You don't really get to choose. You can get better at it. You can practice it. But at the end of the day, that's what you get to work with. And so you just make it your own. And tone is kind of similar, but I think in a lot of ways, what you end up doing is you evolve towards a sound that you like more. Maybe when you're singing, you're going to adjust as much as possible to a singing sound that you like the sound of. At least if you're listening back to yourself and recording or playing live where you're hearing yourself on speakers, then you can kind of reflect on that sound that you want to try and achieve with your singing. It's the same thing with playing the ukulele. And I think that when you have a discussion about tone, it's really one of the most personal things of playing the instrument, because it's really a sound that you evolve towards. It doesn't come pre-packaged and ready to go and you're just, okay, that's my tone. That's not how it works at all. If you're a new ukulele player, you're going to start with bad tone. I have yet to really hear an ukulele player who started playing and was like, hey, teach me something. I'm a beginner. And they play and they have good tone. That's just not how it works. It's part of the process is accumulating that kind of, I guess it's just the physical feedback of when I hit the strings like this, it makes this sound. And when I hit the strings like this, it makes this sound. And I like that sound, but I don't like this sound. So I'm going to just do it this way in the future, and narrowing it down so that you get that better and better sound. That's part of the journey. And it's something I encourage everybody to pay way more attention to than they probably already do. Because if there's one thing that I do not regret practicing and experimenting with, it is futzing with my tone and adjusting my picking angles and seeing how I wanted to hit the strings, seeing how I wanted to hold my left hand fingers so I could get a nice clean sound. That was worth every second that I spent working on it. And so I encourage everybody to, be introspective about that and pay attention to what you're doing, what's working, what's not working, because that is a big part of the music. It's not just the notes. If the notes sound bad because your tone sucks, then everything you play is going to sound bad. So you might as well work on your tone as you're learning the notes and try and make sure everything kind of advances together. So Aldrin threw out a couple of names. I think he said, what did he say? He said Herb Ota Jr., Ota-san, and Imua Garza, I think, was his third pick. And they decided that James and Jake don't count because they're at the top, which is, I thought was kind of interesting because James and Jake have very different tones. The way they touch the strings is very different. To me, if you listen to James, he has a much rounder sound, and he's over the years gone for more of a violin tone kind of a thing where it has less attack. It's a little bit more woody sounding, and it's round. Whereas Jake, not necessarily all the time anymore, but when I think of Jake, I don't think of nice tone. I think of bah, 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 and he's like really hitting the strings super hard, really attacking the strings. And a lot of what we hear as the audience is the sound of his pickup, which I have always thought sounded like crap. Except for like the live album where they did some studio stuff to it to really make it sound nice. I always thought his pickup sounded just like it was all thwacky, 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 that Fishman Matrix sound. Not a fan, but I know a lot of people like it, which is fine. But for me, that's Jake's tone, is kind of that strong attack, real balls to the walls, bright kind of thing. That always seemed to me like his tone. So I thought it was interesting that they decided. I mean, I get that James and Jake both have wonderful tone, but it's very different, right? They have very different touches. That's why if you listen to one of them, in 5 seconds which one it is. You could A/B a bunch of random videos and you would never not know in 5 seconds who's playing the part. That's just who they are. They have that real signature sort of a sound. And I think Herb is another one that goes without saying, because Herb's thing is that he plays so clean that there's really just nothing in the way of the sound, if you will. He's told me, and in his classes over the years, I've heard this story a couple of times, but when he would practice, Ota-san would come and knock on the door and say, "No one cares if they can't hear the notes," or something to that effect. And so he'd try and practice playing really clean so that you could hear every single note. And he's taken that to an amazing degree where it's very, very, very rare. Like I can count on one hand the amount of times that I've heard Herb play a bum note that like buzzed. I mean, let alone a wrong note, but like a note that didn't ring through clearly, like literally on one hand. And I've spent, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of my life with Herb, hanging out in very close quarters, playing music, watching him, seeing what's going on. One hand. And that's just amazing. And so that's one approach. I don't know if Herb ever modeled his tone after anybody specific, if he had a certain thing in his head. I mean, we all have a sound in our head that we try and recreate. And that's what the pursuit of tone is, right? Is just like finding that sound and getting to a point where we can play something on the instrument that sounds nice enough to kind of match what we envision in our head. And I'm sure what Herb hears in his head is just this bell clear, beautiful, round, chimey sound that is just very, very kind of untouched by any sort of blemish. There are no blemishes in Herb's playing at all. And just that's his sound. But I was thinking of trying to add a couple more to the list, just not necessarily of like who's better, but just people to listen to and kind of see how they play. And I think pretty much everybody here, you're going to find they play very cleanly. And that in general, you want to hear music that is clear and confident and to the point and doesn't buzz and rattle all the time. Think of all the amazing guitarists you might listen to. Like B.B. King. Pretty clean. Not a lot of like rattles and buzzes. Then you have somebody like, I don't know, Eddie Van Halen, and I'm trying to think. Van Halen was clean and precise as well, but probably just from the amount of distortion he was playing with, his playing was probably a little bit more rattly. There might have been more blemishes on the notes as he was playing between them because A, he was playing super fast, and B, that distortion really amplifies any little noise that you hear. But clean playing tends to be a characteristic of players who we think of as having good tone or a nice touch or whatever it might be. But somebody who came to my mind that wasn't on Aldrin's list was Tobias. And to me, Tobias has wonderful, stupendous tone because he plays super clean, but he's also very mindful of how he presents music, how he creates notes. And, when he spent 2 weeks living with me here, I kind of got to see this in action because I saw him play a whole bunch, saw him working out some new material and stuff. And it's like everything that he played, very intentional. It was very, once again, it's kind of that round sound. I don't think he plays with nails. And so it's the warmth of the flesh of the fingers, and there's not a whole lot of the picky attack sound. But when you hear Tobias play, it's just clear and clean and well put together as it goes out in the world. And I think something to keep in mind is that tone is not always going to be the same for the same player. As you play through music, the tone can change, right? Sometimes I want to play and I want it to be real bright, pop out, kind of attacky. And then sometimes I want something to be kind of warm and full and round, and I'll change my tone and change my approach and how you present the music. And that's just the dynamics of music. That's just the movement of how you make it feel alive. But in general, when you listen to somebody, their tone is going to fall within a window of tonal possibilities. Like, okay, so here's Tobias when he plays bright and he's intending to, really throw the notes out there. Maybe it sounds like this, and when he wants it to be a little bit more reserved and round and dark, it might sound like this. There's no good or bad. It's just an interesting part of expression to listen to. So if you're not familiar with Tobias, I definitely recommend checking him out. He told me how to say it once. I cannot remember. Bayansover. the Bayan Sover album, which is not how he told me to say it. I can't remember. He'll have to get on the podcast and remind me again. But that album is beautiful. It's really intimately mic'd. It's just the ukulele and a double bass, and you can really hear him play and how he touches the strings. And I'm sure he has some more recent releases, past that. But that was like one of the main albums I remember hearing Tobias play on. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy plays just like so precisely, and he has very strong intention with all the notes. Every note that he plays, he puts it out there in a beautiful way. Not somebody who comes to mind when I think of like beautiful tone, but a distinctive tone nonetheless is Peter Moon. If you asked me what is the most iconic ukulele solo of all time, the most iconic recorded ukulele solo, it's Kavika, hands down. It's just iconic and beautiful and clever and still light years beyond anything else I've ever heard. It's just the way that he plays and the way that he phrases stuff is insane and incredible. And I wish so much that I could have seen him play live at some point. But if you listen to Peter Moon, he is somebody who doesn't play super cleanly and yet has a very signature sound and a very signature tone as he plays. He plays a little bit more clacky, bright, I think probably with a thumb pick kind of a thing on an ukulele. Peter was mainly a guitarist. And so the way that you play a guitar is going to be a lot different from how you play an ukulele. And so if you're primarily playing one instrument, when you go to transition to the other one, you're going to tend to play the other one more like what you came from, is my experience. And I imagine that a lot of that lent itself to the ukulele sound that he played, is that he was used to banging on steel strings. He could play a little bit harder. He was probably playing a little bit closer to the bridge because that's just how you play an acoustic guitar if you want to get that sort of a sound. So when you transition to an ukulele, that's going to come across as more thwacky and bright and like kind of brittle as you play because you're hitting the strings really super hard. And so if you listen to the Kavika ukulele solo, you can hear that it's not super duper clean, but it has a tone to it that's just so iconic. And the whole thing is super iconic. But that tone that Peter plays it with, it would never be the same if you were to play it cleanly. Like you could take any musician and say, learn the Peter Moon Kavika solo note for note and play it. And I'm sure Herb knows how to play it or has figured it out at some point. I'm sure Jake has figured it out at some point. I want to say he even recorded it at some point. But like all these guys know this solo, and I guarantee you they don't sound anything like Peter Moon playing it, just because Peter Moon had his touch and his approach to playing those notes. And even though they weren't maybe as clean as you might envision a modern ukulele player playing, what we're used to now that we've gotten to a point where there's a higher skill ceiling in the ukulele world, now that we have Tobias and James and Jake having pushed things far, we're a little bit more used to a modern sound that's like real clean, people being able to physically play those things immaculately and super well. Whereas I think Peter Moon, at least on the ukulele, certainly on the guitar, he was doing crazy stuff that no one's ever heard before. But on ukulele, certainly he was doing those things. And I think there was a little bit of like that kind of youthful, reckless energy because he was just forging this path. No one had ever played the ukulele like that before. As a lead instrument, like you were shredding on a slack key guitar, it was like, he was one of the first guys to do that. And I just can only imagine what it was like hearing Kavika on the radio, like the first time. I remember the first time I heard Kavika on the radio, I was like, oh my God, what is this? But like when it very first came out in 1969, whoa, what is this? And I just think that it was, part of that tone was that he was just flying by the seat of his pants and just on the very, very cutting edge of what the instrument had done. And, maybe we'll get to a point down the road where there'll be somebody else cutting edge and they'll have a very distinct sound. Maybe they'll go back to kind of that ratty, ragged edge sort of tone because they're playing so far on the edge again. But right now it feels like, I know certainly for me that you kind of play at a place where you can be nice and clean and have that beautiful tone and maybe just be happy with that, I guess. As opposed to, flying balls at the walls all the time, like Eddie Van Halen or whatever, where you're playing crazy, 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 crazy. And within that, you hear kind of the ragged edge where the tone just starts to go away just because you're doing something so different or so fast or whatever it might be. And so I think that, it's just like singers. Like you listen to people on the radio singing these days, they all sound the same. They all have the same approach to singing. And there's this new guy my brother's been listening to. He kind of turned me on to John Harvey. It's like pop punk from the early 2000s. It sounds just like Blink 182 meets Fall Out Boy. It's a sound that we know, and I know that I'm sure all the millennials are like, yeah, this guy's awesome because it's so familiar. But the way that he sings like he's from now. He's got a very distinctive, like 2020s sounding singing voice. And so I think that tone is kind of a fad and it's going to come and go. And right now, we're listening to Tobias and Kale Gameau and Corey and these guys who have this super duper pristine, clean touch and everything's nice and round and warm and that's wonderful. But, back in the day, Peter Moon was tearing it up on Kovica. And after him was Troy Fernandez, who was also kind of ragged edge, rough tone, but playing amazing things. I just wonder where the progression is going to take us into the future. But certainly, no matter your level, you can take a moment to think about tone, think about how you touch the strings, how your picking hand attacks the strings, how your fretting hand holds the strings. And, by paying attention to those things, you can really narrow down and start to find sounds that are pleasing to your ear. Because you're not helpless. A lot of people I see out there, they approach the ukulele like they're kind of a victim to their own playing, but it doesn't have to be that way at all. It's like, if you don't like the sound of it, figure out how to get a better sound. It's that simple. It might not necessarily be easy, but it's simple. Figure out why your sound sucks and make it better. And it might not be fast. You might not get results overnight, but it's something where if you know there's a problem, you can figure it out. Are you just snagging the string on the side of your fingernail? Pick, pick, pick. That's going to give you a bad tone usually. Are your fingernails filed all ragged? That's going to give you a rough tone. That's not going to be so good. All these little things and the angle that you pick. Are you picking with your finger straight onto the string, straight perpendicular with the string? That's not going to give you a very good tone in my experience. So try different things. Try turning your finger. Try rotating your hands. Try a different fingernail. Try cutting your fingernail off. Anything you can possibly think of can affect the tone. And you just need to spend some time figuring out what works and what doesn't. But I think it's time very well spent. And even just a little bit of focus on that can really yield nice results and give you something much better to work with, I think. I think it's super worth it. So if you're interested in kind of learning a little bit more about tone, I think that the right hand and left hand technique books, certainly the left hand technique video course, but the books, I kind of wrote those as maybe an intro and a uncovering of the eyes to help people realize what is possible and what the parameters might be for finding better tone. And so if you're so inclined, that's where I would start with the material that I produce. I don't know anybody else who would talk about tone, honestly. I mean, certainly you'd pick it up along the way if you're like watching James's videos or random stuff on YouTube. But like, this is not the kind of stuff that people talk about. People talk about, maybe they do a quick video on tone and they talk about how you can pick close to the bridge and you can pick over the fretboard. And that's about it. But like the process of sitting for hours and hours and hours and finding your own tone that's closest to what you want to hear, that's not the kind of thing that people tend to talk about. So I think, like I said, that left hand and right hand technique for ukulele ebooks would probably be the closest you could get. But really the best thing you can do is just sit by yourself and experiment. Thanks for tuning in. The Live Ukulele podcast is published on the first and third Saturdays of every month. If you like what you hear, spread the news, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your ukulele club, put it on Facebook, whatever. I'm not on Facebook, so somebody has to put it on Facebook. My voice is about shot here. Once again, if you are so inclined, check out the Groove Ukulele ebook. That is the newest resource. I'm excited to see how it's going to help folks get more comfortable strumming. You can check it out. I'll throw a link in the podcast description along with, just go to liveukulele.com. It's all there. That's home base. That's where all this stuff lives. And if you haven't been, what are you waiting for? Most of it's free. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. I will catch you next time. Until then, take care of yourselves out there. Keep on playing music. Hui ho.